All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the second Bristol Talks, which is a platform for Bristol alumni and friends to network, learn, and inspire. And this is the one where we kind of open it up to the public. So welcome, everyone. If you are a graduate of Bristol, let us know in the comment section so we know. If you're from the public, let us know. What is it that you guys want to learn from today's session, which is female leadership, female leadership in the corporate workplace, a Bristolian perspective. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sharon, who's going to be the moderator for today. Take it away, Sharon.
All right, thanks a lot, Nina. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. So we are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you who have been with us, the Bristol Alumni Network, for years now, and for those of you who are also new to the network as well. So yeah, okay, today marks our very second Bristol Talk of 2021. And Bristol Talk is actually a series of talks featuring, Bristol alumni of different fields, positions, and their groundbreaking work in their chosen path, right? So today, in our very second session, we're proud to be able to host it with these amazing individuals. So we have Joanne, we have Datin, Sunita, and also Navit, Randhawa. So first, the agenda we'll be having Joanne, who is currently the CFO of Affin Bank, to share her experience navigating the corporate world, and followed up by having Datin Sunita, who is the current founder of Climate Governance Malaysia, to share a bit of her industrial insights on climate change, as well as our very last speaker, Navit, who is currently a partner of this legal firm, Asbir, Hira, Singh and Co., and she'll be sharing her experience and her interest in the legal industry as a whole. And yeah, so I'm Shen today. I'm the founder of Makassi, and I'll be moderating the session throughout our session. So before we proceed, there are 3 friendly reminders to all of you here. So first of all, the session will be recorded today and will be shared on various social media channels. And secondly, please do not forget to mute your microphone if you're not talking, right? And last but not least, the views expressed during this session today solely belong to the speakers alone and not anyone else. So without further ado, I shall pass the ground back to the speakers, and we'll end up with a brief Q&A session towards the end of today. Yeah. So welcome, Joanne. So I'll be passing back the floor to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Shen. So I'm kicking off, right?
Yep.
So let me just share. Let me share my screen. So I've prepared for everyone. I was told, just give a little bit of a background to our career. Can you see my screen?
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a nice exercise for me, I have to admit, to actually think about what happened since I left Bristol so many years ago, when things were so analog and I had to write airmail back home and wait 2 weeks before I get a reply. So thinking back to those days, so it was quite fun. And so I'll share with you what we went through, and then, later in the Q&A, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So I started in Bristol when I left, full of expectations and excitement at what the world will present itself. I ended up in Anderson, which is an audit firm. I was an external auditor for 4 years, and from there, I learned a lot. But sadly, after 5 years, there was a big scandal. Everyone has heard about it. It was, and it was the Enron scandal, the energy company, which went down in a blaze of flames, and so did Anderson. I actually left Anderson on the day it was indicted, and that was when I joined CIMB. And when I joined CIMB, the funny thing about this is I joined into the internal audit department. And what was funny was, when I was in Anderson, one of the things I told myself was I did not want to go into internal audit. So the last thing I wanted to do was internal audit. And in fact, I had another offer from a multinational company for internal audit, and I rejected it. And the reason why I took CIMB, and it was still in internal audit at that time, was because of the boss, the guy that hired me. And I think it's very important, the person that you work for, right? That person has to inspire you and give you some direction and all that. So sometimes even you have to open your mind, and I think reflecting back, keeping the mind open was a good thing. So I spent 15 years in CIMB. After that, after saying I'd never joined anywhere for internal audit, but I did in the end. I had a very good run there. I ended my stint in internal audit as the chief internal auditor for the investment bank at that time. But then after that, after 5 years, you get the sense that it's time to move on. And I drew the curve downwards, if you can see, because when you're the chief internal auditor, that's quite senior that's as far as you would go if you're internal audit. So when I decided to move, and that was to finance, I had to come back down again, right? So back to, the working level, I would say, and we're starting back in projects and so on. So when I came in, few things happened. Of course, I got married, then I had a kid, and then I started in finance. And when I was in finance, had another kid. And that I would say this next stretch was probably the most hectic time of my career. Perhaps even defining time, because during this time I was involved in a massive project which required implementation across 3 countries. I was flying regularly to Indonesia and to Thailand every week in one country or another, and at the same time, trying to balance with 2 kids. Thank God, my husband is great with the kids. We had extended help. So hectic, very hectic time, but thankfully the project was implemented, everything settled back down to normal. And then, as you can see, the curve drops again, right? So, you reach a peak, you are, perhaps I would say, master of the field that you're doing, but then you start thinking, that I've learned as much as I can in this area, it's time to move on. So, I had another come down and started again, this time in strategy. Had to learn again a lot of things that I was not aware of, and I would say maybe it was a short stint, so it didn't. I wouldn't say I achieved that much during that time, but I did have a very big realization during this time when I'll say it in an anecdote. I was talking to my CEO at that time, and he was asking me to explain something to him so that he could then present it, and I was very excited. So I went all prepared, and I explained a very technical matter to him, and I started from the very bottom because I thought I would build up the story from a very detailed technical right up to what is the end result. And I think after I finished, and he was good enough to let me finish it, but after that he just took one look at me, and he would say if he could do a face palm, he would have done it, right? And it was that moment that made me realize that a lot of times when you think that you know everything, you want to show that you know everything, and you want to a certain extent, I suppose it's a bit trying to show how much you know. But that's not the reality. When you talk to management, you talk to the CEO, they just need to know from a strategic angle, the big picture. And then if they want to know the details, then that's where the questions come in. So that was a very another defining moment for me. And so I spent some time, and I decided it was time for me to upskill a bit, and that's when I did my MBA. So I did a course with Manchester, a global MBA, where the classes were in Singapore. And it really taught me a lot about strategy. I think this was timely for me, great course, and taught me how to think in a bigger picture, how to approach strategy, how to approach maybe global, have a more global view. And then from there, I moved into business. I went into the commercial banking division, and then that also took me to a more regional role. I got to see what it was like in all the different regions. I was lucky enough to be in CIMB, so we had branches in Cambodia, Thailand, so that really opened my eyes, especially because commercial banking is SME banking. So I got to really see firsthand, what makes SMEs tick, what was important for them. And I would say I learned a great deal from that. And then I moved to MBank. So this is a 15-year journey you're seeing. And I've moved every 4 or 5 years. And then it came time for me to leave CIMB. I guess, sometimes when your time is up. So my time was up. Moved to MBank. In that sense, I again was a little bit of a new role. I took the wholesale bank CFO role. So I was looking after the investment bank as well as the wholesale bank. And that was really corporates, and all the advisory work that came with it. I got to experience and understand what was going in there. And then COVID hit, right? And then COVID hit and suddenly all our working styles changed. And also, of course, I had another kid, a latecomer, I don't know what he was waiting for, but he just came 3 years ago. And last year, I moved on to Affin Bank as the CEO of the Affin Bank Group. And that's where I am now. So that's my journey. What happens next? I don't know. Is it going up? Is it going down? You never know. That's life for you. So I just ended with a question mark. And, for those of you listening, I think if I were to leave you with something just after this, when I look through my own career path, I think it's all about learning. It's all about keeping your mind open to learn, because you will never come to a state where you know everything, never. And there will always be someone who knows more than you. But to keep going and to keep growing, it's not about growing your ranking and your stature. I think it's about growing your mind and your knowledge. So, which is why I'm leaving you with this, my favorite quote from Gandhi: live as you were to die tomorrow, learn as you were to live forever. Okay, that's mine.
You have any questions, leave in the chat box, or else we can pass it on to Datin and Sunita to pick up from.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is not going to be like a bullet train. So I wanted to talk to you about climate. I have one slide right at the end about personal life, but
I'll just show this first.
But I just wanted to share something important that happened recently. On the 8th of October, at the 48th session of the Human Rights Council, for the first time, United Nations made a resolution that everybody has the right to access to a safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment. This has now been recognized as a human right. Now, what is the big deal about this? Why is this so important? And I wanted to walk through some of the thoughts behind this so that you would understand and that you can become mini climate ambassadors in your own right as well, because this is such an important issue that I feel everyone needs to be articulate about the risks that are. So on the 8th of October, this resolution was, a lot of people had been working, thousands, maybe millions of people for years and years to achieve this. And there were thousands of witness testimonies being given as well. And Malaysia co-sponsored this. So why is this happening now? Why is it important to safeguard our right to such an environment? Why is there such a tremendous momentum by allocators of capital, such as institutional investors, to demand for increased disclosure so that they can decide where capital is going? Well, this chart is really important. For millennia, societies and civilizations have thrived because of climatic stability. So the Industrial Revolution was an unprecedented breakthrough, which led to dramatic increases not only in economic growth, but also an increase in human population and life expectancy. Now, we understand that everything we do is extractive of the environment: water, air, arable land. But this tremendous rate of population and economic growth relies on a tremendous rate of extraction of natural resources. And so we are depleting the stock of natural capital, and the science is clear. The data is available. There's a direct causality between human activity, which is extractive and polluting, and the impact on the environment. And now we're facing a triple crisis of climate, loss of biodiversity, and extraordinary amounts of pollution that's going back into the environment. And I'll explain later why this is exceeding planetary boundaries. So naturally, as the world population grows, some countries are growing faster than others, and a lot of the problem is arising out of Asia. But is this fair? Because if you look at this from a GDP per capita, the largest countries in the world actually have some of the lowest GDP per capita, and some countries which are not as big have very high GDP per capita, and they're consuming much more resources than a lot of other citizens of the world. To put it in another perspective, when you look at planetary boundaries, and we start off with common concepts like climate change, ozone depletion, ocean acidification, but there's other things as well. The amount of soil that we're using is affecting the global nitrogen phosphate cycles. We're losing biodiversity at humongous rates. Global fresh water is reducing, and we need water. We don't need food as much as we need water. And of course, we are loading a lot of chemicals and aerosols into the atmosphere and into the planet. So we're destroying the Earth systems, and we rely on the Earth systems to survive. So humanity is using much more than the Earth can regenerate. We're overshooting the regenerative capacity. So this is the big difference that we're seeing now. With increase in population, with increase in economic growth, this is the impact on the environment. And keeping our footprint within the planet's capacity is the minimum threshold for sustainability, but we're persistently overusing this. How persistently are we overusing this? Well, some citizens live as though there were 4 or 5 planet Earths that they can rely on. We have a concept called the Earth Overshoot Day, when humanity's demand for ecological resources exceeds what the Earth can regenerate. And within the first 7 months of this year, we had already exceeded this. And Malaysia's is actually faster because we are also an exporting nation. So we are so kind-hearted, we're extracting from our environment as a water-stressed country, and we're exporting it to other people, and we're not necessarily factoring in these ecosystem services. And this part of the world is going to be disproportionately affected. As you can see, the dark purple color are those parts of the world which will experience much more heat waves. And many of us, I mean, even if we're not a construction worker or plantation worker or a policeman, many of us are going to be affected. And not only that, the amount of rain is going to increase because with warmer weather, that's more water that's contained in the clouds. And this is why the thunderstorms are becoming much more intense. And in a country where we're 80% urbanized, this means you're going to have much more increased rates of flash flooding because of the built environment, because the cement, glass, concrete bricks don't allow the earth to absorb the water. So it just runs off and creates flash flooding. So what we're understanding is that when one biological system crashes, it is likely to drag others down, triggering a cascade of chaos, this systemic environmental collapse. And it's not just happening in Brazil, it's happening far closer to home. And this is something that we all need to be mindful of. So specifically in relation to carbon, I think the science is very clear. You know, we know where we are, we can measure it, we can track where it's coming from. And although a lot of people say that, they have net zero targets by mid-century, which is only 30 years away, but in reality, we actually need to halve our emissions by 2030. So what does this mean, halving our emissions? Well, last year, with almost the entire world under lockdown, our carbon footprint only dropped by 6%. So imagine if you need to halve in the next 8 years, how transformational is this needed? And so people like Johan Rockström, which is one of the climate leaders, he is very clear. We need to halve by every decade. That is the pace, that is non-negotiable. We need to be aiming for carbon neutrality today and do not kick the can down the road. And if there's anybody who's saying, oh, I've got access to technology, etc., don't allow them to get away with it because there are no technologies that are available to scale. And so therefore, we need to make sure that we're all stepping up and ensuring there's more independent and institutionalized ways of holding commitments to account. So the numbers are very clear. We know which are the businesses that have been polluting. And this is the case here. As you set your carbon targets, you have to disclose your carbon footprint as well. As a matter of fact, we even know who are the banks that are financing fossil fuels. And so this is something that for financial institutions is going to be a double-edged sword. because it's very clear who is still funding the emission of carbon emission. So of course, at the recent COP26, GFANZ, which has 450 plus members, committed to 130 trillion of assets towards sustainability initiatives. So this also includes the transition. So dirty businesses that want to transition to green business, they should also be financed as well. But what is already happening, and we're seeing this, is the change in loan spreads. So fossil fuels is becoming more expensive, renewable energy is becoming more affordable. And so, of course, most recently in Malaysia, large-scale solar 3 tender, the bid price for large-scale solar was actually lower than conventional energy. So the consequences are our sovereign ratings are going to fall. And these are independent assessments based on current information, 6 notches of downgrades. Courts are stepping up and saying that businesses have a legal obligation to reduce their CO2 emissions. So the courts are actually saying this. Now, this specific precedent was based on Dutch treaties that doesn't apply to Malaysia, but Malaysia co-sponsored this recent Human Rights Council on the right to a safe and sustainable environment. So I'm sure there are going to be implications there, and we need to explore that more closely. So let me give you a case study of exactly what will happen. So Toyota, the largest automaker in the world, says that their factories account for just 2% of carbon footprint. But everyone recognizes that you need to be responsible for your scope 3 as well, because you are giving suppliers business, right? So let's do a simple calculation. 100% of the carbon footprint, therefore, is 284 million tons. Their earnings are 22 billion a year. At what price of carbon does Toyota, this global auto manufacturer, become loss-making, or its profits are zeroized, or it becomes a stranded asset? So this number is $77. What is the price of carbon right now? Well, we have 2 carbon markets we can refer to. These are mandatory markets in the European Union and UK. So it's not exactly comparable. There's no global carbon price. But in the EU, the futures prices are already at $70. And in the UK, the futures prices are already hitting $100. That means theoretically, Toyota is already a stranded asset. And this is why investors, bankers, prudential regulators like central banks are demanding for increased disclosure. They are not helping you on the transition because there's only limited resources that we have. So they just want you to provide the disclosure. They will decide if they're going to fund you or not. So naturally, carbon pricing as a climate change tool is gaining in popularity because the moment you quantify this, otherwise it's an example of a classic market failure. The cost of pollution is borne by society at large, while the profits are being reaped by the polluters. So this doesn't make sense. So carbon pricing is something that's important. ISSB new standards are going to be a game changer when it's issued in June next year. But on the 3rd of November, they also issued prototype templates, the sort of disclosures they're going to be asking for. So in your sustainability report, they will want to know what is your exposure to climate-related risks, how is management using their resources. They want to evaluate your ability to adapt. They want to understand the assessment of the impact of significant risks and your transition plans. How exactly is the reporting entity planning to achieve any climate-related targets? How it's advancing research and development? What scenarios are you using, whether it's Paris-aligned, or whether it's part of the NGFS, the network of central banks, which has 101 members right now, or IEA, which has also come up with a roadmap. Why do you believe that these scenarios are relevant to you? What is the time horizon? What are the inputs? And what are the policies in Malaysia that you think are going to work for you? So obviously, I don't think Malaysia will be one of the first few countries adopting this. But you know what? You might be working with customers and suppliers who are in the OECD who are going to be adopting this. And Standard Chartered ran a survey in July this year showing very clearly MNCs are going to cut you out of the supply chain if you don't match their sustainability ambitions. So elsewhere, we also have instances where political air pollution can be listed as a cause of death as well. So this is increasingly being recognized, the implications of environment being destroyed. So I wanted to share some scenes with you. Now, this happened just in the last few weeks. Why am I doing this? Because human beings have an innate bias. We listen and we remember what aligns to my personal narrative and worldview. But with the Human Rights Day on yesterday, with the unprecedented resolutions co-sponsored by Malaysia of our right to a safe and clean environment, we also need to remember that when we have extreme weather events like this, which leads to devastation and destruction, it is natural that those who are disproportionately affected are going to look around and they're going to ask who should be responsible, who knew and failed to act, who are the stewards who understood but did not manage these risks to the best of their abilities. And in the face of this recognition that we all have the right to an environment which is safe, clean, healthy, sustainable, with a renewed sense of urgency post-COP26, we need to go beyond naming and shaming. How should companies and directors be held liable if they continue polluting? Should immunity of public officers still hold, especially when extreme weather events are already taking place? We already know the transition pathway, which is urgently needed as informed by science. So if those responsible are fully aware of the consequences, but continue with, for example, development approvals, investments in stranded assets, not sufficiently investing in adaptation efforts, withholding data, which will enable informed decisions to be made, the conversation is about how much liability should be attached for knowing but failing to act. So I want to leave you guys with this thought. This is something that, I feel very strongly about. And I want to give you enough information that each of you can be mini ambassadors, that you're sufficiently climate literate, that you're able to articulate what the real challenges are. Because it's not as simple as just setting a net zero target. It involves our decisions in every aspect of our lives. Personally, some of you might know my husband passed away 2.5 years ago, which is most probably the most traumatic thing that ever happened to me. But I have 2 dogs at home who are usually quiet and sleeping like this. And my niece recently turned 15 today. Today's her birthday, and she's a very big girl now. And so that's me on the personal side of me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks a lot for sharing your insights on climate change, Datin, Sunita. I believe everyone is equally as inspired as me. So I'll leave the Q&A towards the end of the session. Without further ado, I'll just pass it back to Navit again.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Navit. I graduated from Bristol in the year 1999. So I was the last legal batch to graduate in the last millennia. So moving forward, I did the bar in London before I came back to Malaysia, and I was called to the Malaysian bar in the year 2001. This slide was prepared purely so that I could put the picture of the beautiful Wills Memorial Building, which was the law faculty when I was at Bristol. And I don't know whether it's still the law faculty. And I distinctly remember at our graduation, they told us that it's not a guarantee it'll always remain the law faculty, but I hope it is. So after I came into legal practice, I also became a mediator. That was sometime in the year 2005, 2006. And then in the year 2019, I completed my diploma for international commercial arbitration. Sorry, Nina, I didn't mean for the slides to run. If we go to the next slide, I would just like to talk about corporate law in Bristol. The one and only subject that my late father insisted that I do at Bristol University was company law, because in the 3rd year, we could do all optional subjects. And the company law module, which was taught by the brilliant Nigel Fury, covered the birth of the company to the death of the company. And honestly, it seemed really, really dry and boring when we were doing it. But when I came into practice, I actually realized that company law presented the most complex and challenging problems, and that advice to do company law in the 3rd year was actually very good advice. So any law students and budding entrepreneurs who want to start their own company, foundation in law is a good choice to make, and especially if you're at Bristol University. Next slide, please, Nina. Okay, when I was thinking about today's topic, honestly, I thought these two pictures would actually put everything into perspective. Well, it's my perspective. When I was a young lawyer, I used to look up to a lot of female leaders. And what I saw was a lady who had it all together with her cape on and getting to work every day, getting results. As I progressed on the ladder, I became more senior as a lawyer and then went into my different forays. I realized that I have become the person on the right, which is someone who is on a unicycle and constantly juggling and multitasking. So while from the outside, it seems like female leadership in the corporate workplace may appear really together, maybe something very glamorous, but there is a lot of work in the background that happens in order to get that image out there. And I have to say that I'm sorry if I burst anyone's bubble with these two photographs, but this is my perspective of female leadership in the corporate workplace. Now, I also thought about what I would say to my 21-year-old self, because at the end of the day, when I look back, I don't think I'm by any means done, but I do think that this is a journey and it continues. Learning never stops. And I think this is very, very pertinent because it's a luxury we cannot afford to say, I don't want to learn anymore, because you learn something new every day. And what COVID has taught us is whatever we knew, it was turned on its tail and we had to relearn things sometimes from the basics. The second thing I would tell myself is to cultivate perseverance, because you will make mistakes and you will learn from them, but don't stop knocking on the doors. Don't stop taking the opportunities, take the courage and actually tell yourself that step out of your comfort zone and do something new. You will learn something. The third thing is communication is key. And I think this is something I learned in mediation, because when you learn mediation, you also learn the art of listening, where sometimes you hear what people are saying, and then you also try to hear what they are trying to say, but maybe not expressing it so well. So that was something I'm very grateful, a skill that I picked up, and it has helped me in my career. That also connects with knowing your client, the audience, and learning how to read a room. A lot of my male colleagues have said to me from time to time, why do you think that? And then you say, but that's just my gut feeling. And one said to me, you women, sometimes you come up with these things that are so unfathomable to them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Female intuition can be a plus point. So learn to listen to it and recognize it when it's right. Finally, I would say sleep well and always disconnect when you can. I think for me, something mind-changing was when I read the book Thrive by Arianna Huffington. It actually places a lot of importance in sleeping well, because you can have all the knowledge, you can communicate with everybody, you can get your solution done properly. But at the end of the day, if you don't present it well, then it's all for naught. So if you sleep well, you will perform at your optimum. And in this day and age of technology, you have to learn to disconnect. How you do it, it's a very individual process. But if you can, sometimes it's a luxury, but it is very necessary. I'm going to leave you with a final thing. This is my final slide, Nina, don't worry, but I'm just going to leave you with one final thing, where it's a quote by Maya Angelou, and she says, do your best till you know better. And when you know better, do better. So that's all I have to say about this topic for the moment.
Yes, thanks a lot for sharing, Asani, Navit. Okay, so there's a question from Sofina Saleh. So she mentioned that the Malaysian economy consists of secondary sector like manufacturing, electronic or machinery, and primary sector like rubber, palm oil, both contribute to the largest GDP. But if policymaker prohibits further extraction, we are kind of trapped in a vicious cycle, like we trade off money for environment. So how would you suggest, I think this question is for you, Datin Sunita. So how would you suggest that what would source out to make the money move into Malaysia? So from tertiary sectors or niche sectors at all. And this applies to international countries as well.
I think all countries are having to assess what are their scarce resources, which is the natural environment. So a country like Australia, if you're water stressed and yet you're exporting agricultural produce, then are you really costing in the cost of not just water replacement, but also if you need to desalinate, for example. So very often for things that are utilities like electricity, water, the air that we breathe, we don't tend to pay full pricing for this. Arable land. So we're saying that we've committed to not deforesting. The Ministry of Plantations and Industries has already said that they're not going to increase the amount of plantation land, which is I think about 6 million hectares. So how are we going to use this much more efficiently? Because for palm oil plantations, for example, you can only have 3 planting cycles. After 75 years, you can't use the soil anymore and you've left chemicals in the ground. So these are conversations that we need to think seriously about because we're not food sufficient as a nation. We might have enough poultry and eggs, but we import our feedstock. So if we're going to be using our arable land irresponsibly, if I give you an example of Vietnam. In March last year, as soon as the lockdown started, the Vietnamese government said we're halting exports of rice because we need to make sure that we have enough rice for ourselves before we export this. So government can come late to the table, but they have a huge arsenal of policies that they can implement very quickly. So it's up to business, it's up to households, it's up to individuals to become more climate resilient. It's a complex question, Sofina, but structurally, where is the economy going? And we need to each think very seriously about what our competitive edge is.
So you mentioned mini ambassadors, right? So what do you suggest that all Malaysians, regardless of generational gaps, how can we play a part to take part in these change?
So there's so much that individuals can do. And it's every single one of your lifestyle choices. I remember watching an interview with the CEO of Coca-Cola, and the interviewer is challenging him, your can of Coke has 12 spoons of sugar in it. How can you be selling something like this? Colored, sugared, carbonated water. And you know what he kept repeating over and over again? He said, we are disclosing this. We are disclosing this. This information is on the can. If you're still buying this, what can I do about this? Right? So sure, businesses have a responsibility, but this entire value chain of business is triggered by people like you and I making that decision to buy, the equivalent of a can of Coke. Our West Malaysian grid, electricity grid, is almost 100% fossil fuel and large hydro, which is also not environmentally friendly because you destroy so much biodiversity when you have large hydro. So, and also in terms of the distribution and the generation of electricity, up to 95% is actually lost during distribution and generation. So you get 5% of the electricity to run your aircon, your home, your, whatever else you're using electricity for. So every single decision that you make, whether you're buying goods that aren't designed for longevity, our phones are designed for obsolescence, for example. So every single decision that you make has an implication.
Datin Sunita, you mentioned about consumption, right? So I believe even for the pandemic as a whole, a lot of people have been purchasing stuff online, and that contributes to a lot of the wastage, right, in terms of resources. So do you think Malaysia, in the coming years at all, would start introducing, recycling campaigns? Because, back in the UK, we have a lot of the recycling bins, and it has been made as a policy, if I'm not mistaken, that, for consumers or any residents, we have to recycle. but it's not readily available in Malaysia yet.
So there are already NGOs that are working on this. They will come to your neighborhood. If you get your neighborhood to work together and separate at source, they will come. The organizations like Nestle are working with Suchi, and they're speaking to tens of thousands of households to demonstrate to the Selangor state government that households will separate at source if you provide the facilities for them to do this. So, there's so many initiatives that can be done. And of course, there's the concept of extended producer responsibility, which EPU is already talking about, funded by the German government and by the EU, as to how we're going to be able to impose this on producers. So if you're Carlsberg or Dutch Lady or Nestle, when your packaging ends up in the river, that you have to be responsible. So what do? You have to show that you've provided enough facilities for the consumer to return the goods to you, that these goods are good for the environment. For example, they're biodegradable. So this is all in that concept of extended producer responsibility.
Okay, Sufina has this question who is open to all speakers. So she said that she believes we learn more by making mistakes, right? So her concern is sometimes for impatient risk takers who wants to do something extraordinary simply because they want to know the aftermath of their particular action. Basically, any advice on how to survive in the game of the strategy and survival of the fittest?
Okay, I can answer this because I'm actually reading this book now. If anyone is interested or haven't read it yet, it's Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, and it's a really good book, and it's a lot of food for thought. It's not that I'm also hopeful. I'm very positive that generally people are not trying to get into the rat race and trying to get one over the other. It really comes down to the leader, who is leading them and who is setting the tone. So when you set a tone of togetherness and helping each other and build a safe zone, you will find that people don't try to, what was the word that you used? A game of survival of the fittest. Yeah, that's right. People are not trying to get to that point where only the fittest survive. The leaders build an environment that everyone helps each other. And I think when you talk about corporations, that also is very important. Corporations where the leadership is one of collaboration, of building up each other to build, to get to a stronger and more sustainable corporation, things that last lifetimes, more than one lifetime. You will find that those are the ones that do really well and stand the test of time, as opposed to some of the, one of the examples he gave was actually Merrill Lynch. The leader there was encouraging survival of the fittest kind of environment where, you wanted to be good, you got to push down the other person, and the information that you had, you kept to yourself, because if you were to share information to the next guy, then, they will have one up on you and so on and so forth. So when you cultivate that kind of culture, then, it will be bad. So I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question, but I think it all comes down to leadership.
And you also have this question, right? So, and it's also open to all speakers. So any advice for the one important trait or skill for any female in the boardroom? So basically, what do you think are the skills required to perform the task in order to get into the boardroom at all, as from a female perspective?
I'll take that. It says any advice for one important trait or skill for any female in the boardroom. I think for in the boardroom, I would say one trait to cultivate is to speak up. That if ask questions, sometimes the questions that you ask may not be popular, but if you want to have an answer, ask the questions, formulate what you want to say, and ask it based on the facts that are presented to you. But it's your duty to speak up.
How do you deal with like a disparity in terms of like opinions, right? Because sometimes people might just bring it down as, having, unaccountable opinions. So as a person who speak up, so how do you make sure that people hear you and, guarantee the credibility of it?
Shen, you mean that, how do I make myself heard?
Yeah, so any advice on like how women can work across the divides of opinions at all?
Okay, I think first of all, when you ask questions, you ask them based on the facts that are presented to you. So that itself, when you ask questions, you will be taken seriously. Are you concerned about the fact that when you speak up, that you're not taken seriously? Is that what you're asking? Or am I getting that right?
I believe some of the females out there did experience this sort of, encounter before, such that they tried to speak up, but they were also dismissed immediately.
I would say you still continue speaking up. That's your duty. You have to keep speaking up. You're going to be knocked down. I think throughout your career, there will be times where you are knocked down, sometimes rightfully, sometimes wrongfully, but you don't stop trying. You keep speaking up.
Joanne and Datin, Sunita, what do you think of that topic that we have just discussed? So how can women actually work across, the divide of opinions?
I think women have a special trait. One thing is we tend to be more empathetic, and it helps us then to listen better. So sometimes, and I've heard this before, where you listen to hear and understand as opposed to listening to answer and put your point across. And when you do that, when it comes to speaking out, then that's where you maybe a little bit of your intuition as well. You know how to put your point across in a manner that the other side will accept. Because sometimes when you think that you just want your point of view and you just keep going, and I've seen this happen many times, right? Because you're not listening to and not trying to understand where the other party or where the other people are where they're coming from. Everyone has a reason and a motivation for a point. So sometimes when you're in tense situations, when you're in big meetings, boardroom, and so on, and there's a hot topic, it's always good to stop and listen with empathy. That's my point for this. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Joanne. I really like the way you described it. So I've been sitting on board since 2002. And at that stage, you can imagine, before even corporate governance was a hot topic, fashionable, and definitely before gender diversity. And I would be the only woman in the room, aside from the tea lady who would come in and out, and maybe the company secretary as well. I think it's really important that for the other board members to respect you, that you really have to come prepared. You need to understand not just what's in the current board pack, but what was discussed earlier. You need to understand what is happening in the environment. And I feel very often newbies, whether male or female, they tend to underestimate that. So, you jump in with your own opinions, but you don't exactly understand what is actually going on. And then it's very difficult to earn someone's respect. It's difficult to come back from that, right? So, and this is why what Joanne is saying is so important. At the beginning stages, I spend a lot of time just really, really listening. And then when you open your mouth, when you intervene, then you really have that context. And then you reach a stage where you even draw your breath and everybody's listening because they know it's just going to be pure gold coming out and they better listen to this and they better catch this. But this respect is very difficult to earn because at the same time, you're having to deal with what we spoke about earlier, the board dynamics. There's so many people, don't assume that these people are stupid. Everyone is clever. They've all had their own experience. They're all coming from a perfectly valid, justifiable position. So, and you need to, when you intervene, you need to be able to cater to, it's not just small group or one-on-one, right? Where you can see from their body language, the flicker of their eye, they're not happy, they're not sure, they don't have a clue what you're talking about, better switch language or whatever it is. So when it's a bigger room, then of course you meet every few months, but still to be able to influence people, because that's what you really want to do, right? You don't just want to communicate, oh, I think that A is B, or that we should do X, Y, Z. If that's the case, then you're not influencing anyone. But if you want to negotiate and influence, then you need to really understand what are the levers driving these people so that you can persuade everyone around the table to say, something, we better look into this. We need more information. Or what we had agreed to earlier, let's revisit this at the next board meeting. So all of this is experience. You need to have gone through terrible board meetings. You need to have people shouting at you. And what happened to me once, you end up sitting in the car just crying and crying, so there's no other way to learn. You just have to go through it.
Three of you mentioned, for female leadership, right? How do we define leadership over here? We have to be empathetic. We have to listen. and then we have to come prepared. So are there any other traits that you think would help?
I think you need to stay relevant. So if right now, for example, ESG is a hot topic, or climate, or just a few years ago, corporate governance. So you need to understand what is going on in that space, right? Because increasingly when boards are looking for new candidates, for example, and even in the C-suite, they want someone who understands what the approaching tsunamis look like. You know, if you're still, I'll tell you a really funny story. Last week I'm having dinner and this old friend walks into the coffee house and he's like, oh, what are you doing now? So I said, oh, I'm working on climate change. He said, you know what? We all need change. We all need change. So I said, it's climate change. And he says, you're trying to change the climate. So it's like, if you don't even get what is happening, then, on the other side, they're just going to think, wow, this person is so out of it. They don't even understand what's going on. And everyone in the world is saying this is an existential crisis, right? And here's someone who's like, you're trying to change the climate. How are we going to do that? So, that's a very ridiculous example, but this is happening on subtler levels all the time, So, and I see this, at a board level, we're at a certain level of maturity or experience or whatever you want to call it, that level of board dynamics. And when someone new comes in and they don't get it, they don't understand, they haven't been bothered, they're not briefed, they're not prepared, it's so obvious. It's very, very obvious. Yeah.
That's a great tip. So what do you think, Joanne?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think to echo what Datin Sunita said, and it reminds me of this, in Finding Nemo, the cartoon, the little Dory always says, just keep swimming. Actually, it's just keep learning. You got to just keep learning to keep relevant. Absolutely, I agree with that.
Totally. Navit, do you have anything to add on for this one?
No, I think my fellow panelists have covered it very succinctly and eloquently. Just keep learning. It's a luxury. It's no longer a luxury. It is a necessity.
Necessity, yeah.
See. So believe, there's this new word coming up, which is work-life integration rather than work-life balance. So how do you balance career, personal life, and passions equally? Is there such a thing as balance at all?
I'll start that. I think the answer is yes. There is balance. There is such thing. But don't think that balance is carved out very nicely, where you've got every day you get that balance. It doesn't work that way, right? You've got to look at it on a longer term, where there will be some times where maybe it's all family or maybe it's all work, but it cannot be too prolonged, right? So work-life balance means that you have sufficient time for all your important things over a space of a particular maybe time frame, maybe in a week or so. And how do you achieve work-life balance? I just add on. I mean, it's a lot to do with time management and your support system. And for those of you who are married, it's about finding that partner who will support you. Because if you want a career, and especially for women, I would say, if you don't find that partner who's going to support you in your career, and I say partner because, everything has to be shared, right? The bringing up of the kids, the housework and things like that, because we've gone through our whole, as I was telling you earlier, the most difficult time of my career was back when I was in CMB, those days when I was traveling. And even now I'm having, with a 3-year-old, it's quite difficult as well. But if you have someone to shoulder and share the load, that helps a lot. Yeah. And then the balance becomes better. So big point here for you ladies who are looking, if you want a career, right, you better find a guy who is supportive. If not, please don't get married.
All I would say is my slide that shows you that lady on the unicycle juggling. I would say that there are some days, yes, I do achieve a work-life balance. Some days I fail miserably, but then you have to keep trying because you do need to disconnect, especially when you grow older. While you can burn the midnight oil while you're younger, but as age catches up, it's more and more important to take care of your health and establish that work-life balance. Having said that, I did graduate in 1999, not in 1920.
Okay, so I've got two examples I want to share with you. You know what my husband and I, what we used to do together, and then number two about sincerity. So number one, while my husband was around, I used to divide my day into thirds. I would go to work in the morning. In the afternoon, I come back home and it's just me time. And in the evening, when he came back, because he was very senior in the Ministry of Health, so we'd just sit down and we'd talk about his day, because I was very kipo. So much so that even now, 2.5 years on, the pengarah of a hospital, he was senior in MOH, right? So he looked after the hospitals. So the pengarah of a hospital, even to today, will still call me crying on the phone, so many problems, COVID, etc. Because I just knew what was going on. I knew these people. And vice versa. So when we launched CGM the night before, he stayed up with me. It was like my first major climate talk, and I didn't know anything about climate. And he would go through the slides with me like maybe 3 times, move the slide around, pause here. People are going to want to think about this, and so that was the level of support we gave to each other. I knew everything that was happening in his life, and I supported him, and vice versa. So it's a hard act to follow. Call. Yeah. So, but I think women now can choose, right? We're not married off as child brides at 13 years old, and yeah. Then the other thing is sincerity. When we're talking about work-life balance and prioritizing, so it's actually about what are your priorities, right? And you need to be sincere with yourself, because if you're sincere and you're thinking, no, I want to spend 120% of my time at work, then just go all out and do it. Does that make you a better person? Well, most probably you're going to be an asshole at work. But if it's what you really, really want, then you just need to go after it. But at some stage in your life, you're going to think, who do I want to grow old with? Who do I want to say that, I spent 30 years, 50 years of my life with? Do I really, what sort of kids do I want to have? So for me, it boils down to sincerity. How sincere are you about wanting to be the best version of yourself? And if you think the best version of yourself needs yoga, meditation, time with children, time with your parents, time with elderly relatives, doing charity work, doing service, then you've got to be sincere about that, right? And you've got to make time for that, because otherwise you're just bullshitting yourselves and everyone around you. So for me, it comes down to sincerity. And most of the time, I feel that's where people, so it's not so much about work-life balance, your priorities are out, people are not supporting you. If this is important to you, then act like it is important to you, right?
So I'm at this stage where, a lot of fresh graduates, they just came out to, look for jobs, and they just entered the work field. So, as much as they would like to equally contribute the skill to contribute some segment towards their family or relationships, but they're also struggling in terms of like managing expectations with their bosses at work. So I think it's also something that Malaysia has to work on in terms of cultivating a very realistic expectations in the corporate field. So do you think there could be some policies in place such that there should be a healthy work hours?
So we ran a series of roundtable conversations on climate. And what we realized, a lot of the simple, easily actionable policy recommendations have been known for many, many years. And it's the same thing about gender balance in the workplace. We already know more than 50% of the graduates are women. At the beginning of your work life, chances are it's 50-50. But for some reason, by the time you get up to the board, we only have 25% women. So there's systemic discrimination for women to be the best versions of themselves. And there was a very recent study showing that if women are just paid 3% less than men, in 30 years' time, that's only 1 in 10 women that will stay on to be in the boardroom. So that's only 10% in the boardroom. And you start with 50-50. So even discrimination in pay makes a big difference as well. Because when it comes to who's staying at home to look after the kids, they're going to say, well, you're earning more, why don't you do it? Right? So, but we have to work with, it is what it is, and there just isn't the capability in the government right now. So, there's no point, if you feel so badly about this, you need to migrate. But otherwise, you just have to find ways of making it work, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, there's no point us sitting in this small room, 14 of us bitching about the government. We just need to make it work.
I would like to add something though. I mean, in Malaysia, I mean, let's say you're bringing up a family, it's much better or easier here than it would be if you were overseas, because you had the access, your parents are here, or you would have access to mates, where in overseas, I think that's not as easily it doesn't come by so easily. So the support system is much better here. Yes, but just coming back to that Sunita's point, I think the mindset of the men also have to change. So in my working life, I come across a lot of women who maybe want to work a little bit more, want to work a little bit harder, but they have that difficulty because of their spouses maybe wanting them to be at home more, to be the one to take care of the kids perhaps, or maybe of course, I mean, there is a balance. In that case, I think there should be a balance. We both sides must support each other, and then it works very well. And then I see ladies who have that support to their spouses or to their extended family. I mean, they are able to do much better for one, and also they're much happier. They don't have the stress of home resting on their head when they go to work. Yeah. So those are just my thoughts.
So what about for three of you experienced professionals, so how do you push for systematic change around ideas that are not too popular?
Okay, push for systemic ideas. So you're basically trying to say, how do you ask people to change? I think that first we have to understand your audience. What is it that they are scared about? Because change is scary. And sometimes it's understanding the mindset of your audience. It is the understanding the mindset of the organization you're working with. What are their hurdles and what is their concerns? When you understand that, then taking into account all that data, then you can actually formulate a solution. And that is how I would approach it. Because at the end of the day, it's about listening and it's about information and it's about sometimes listening to what is not being said.
I was going to say, I think this is something that probably Sunita knows a lot about. I mean, this big change cannot happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in one meeting or one boardroom sitting or what. It's really going to take a lot of change. When just from my experience, I spent 2 years trying to put in a new process and a new framework many years ago at the bank. It was a very painful process, because no one agreed with it, right? And everyone didn't want it, and they were fighting about it. But how do you get it done, right? It's all about engagement. And sometimes, to a certain extent, engagement, when it comes to these kind of things, women have a little bit of a softer touch, maybe the lesser ego, I don't know. I mean, but when it comes to trying to persuade, the art of persuasion, and how to engage without being threatening, and trying to put your point across without trying to seem like you are putting the other side down, the other point of view. And it's constant engagement, workshops every week, one-on-one sessions with the hardest guys, the ones that don't believe in it, and it just goes on and on, right? Before you get it. So it's a lot of hard work.
Change takes place overnight. I mean, over a period of time. So if it's a mandatory process, do you have any tip in terms of accelerating it? Because, for corporate versus start, we all know that start are very agile, but in terms of corporation, so is there any, quick tip to help accelerate the process at all?
It's called a dictatorship. It's my way or the highway. That's the fastest way to.
So before we wrap up today, right, I would like to just seek some very generic advice on So what sort of advice would you give to the next generation of leaders looking to grow either their own business or within the company that they work for?
Okay, my advice is to be aware of yourself. I mean, you have to have self-awareness as you go through life. It's not just about work, it's also about your day-to-day life. You have to be aware what works for you and what doesn't, and what's working and what is not. Because a lot of people, I think, just get caught up with the day-to-day life, your routine and all that, and you forget to think too much about what is happening to you and the people around you. That self-awareness, I think, is lost on a lot of people. Yeah. So you need to get them. And some examples of how to do it is speaking to people who are outside your comfort zone, maybe some new people, to give you different perspectives. Reading is also a really great way of giving you different ideas and how to maybe live life. I mean, you're talking about work-life balance, and how to find that kind of balance. I read this book called The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. It's a really good book, right? About trying to find that balance between health, your spiritual side, and your mindset and all that. I think, for those of you looking for some guidance there, you need to read that. It's a good one. So that's my advice to all of you. Be self-aware.
I would say that you also have to keep learning. It's very, very important. As I said earlier, it's a necessity. It's no longer a luxury, and that's one thing COVID has taught us, that change is constant and it's here to stay. And hopefully, climate change will also be there.
Yeah, thank you, Shen. I definitely echo what they both said.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for attending this session, everyone. Yeah, it has been a great session, and I totally agree on self-awareness, because I'm also, I practice meditation every morning, and through, reflection, you do get a lot of, you are more aware of the surrounding and know what's actually happening. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. So take care, everyone, and we hope to see you soon in our next Bristol Talk then.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
a good
Thank you,
weekend.
everyone.
All right.
And
Bye.
keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.